At 10:03 in the morning on June 19, 1944, Lieutenant Alexander Vreeland sat in a vibrating cockpit 15,000 feet above the Philippine Sea, watching his oil pressure gauge flicker like a dying heartbeat. The needle bounced between 65 and 62 pounds per square inch. Normal was 75. Anything below 50 meant the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine bolted to his Grumman F6F Hellcat would seize solid in approximately 90 minutes, maybe less. The supercharger bearing was already rattling in its housing, a metallic chatter he could feel through the control stick, through his boots, through his teeth. This airplane was grounded. By every regulation in the United States Navy Handbook, Hellcat number 23, Bureau number 40467, should have been chained to the deck with a red tagged maintenance hold slapped across its engine cowling. But Alexander Vreeland wasn't interested in regulations anymore. He had stopped caring about the manual the day his best friend burned alive because of it. The radio in his helmet crackled with controlled panic. The voice belonged to the fighter direction officer, somewhere deep in the steel belly of the USS Lexington, a man whose job was to watch green phosphor dots crawl across a radar screen and translate terror into coordinates. All fighters vector 270 Angels 20, many bogies inbound. Repeat, many bogies. Many, not 10, not 20, many, which in Navy radar operator language meant the screen wasn't showing individual contacts anymore. It was showing a solid wall of static moving west at 300 miles an hour. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, commander of the Japanese mobile fleet, had just emptied every flyable aircraft off 9 aircraft carriers. Intelligence estimated 473 enemy planes currently clawing for altitude, their engines screaming their pilots, breathing pure oxygen through rubber masks, all of them pointed like a spear at the heart of Task Force 58. It was the largest aerial armada ever assembled for a single strike in the history of naval warfare. And standing in their way was Alexander Vreeland, sitting in a Hellcat that sounded like a tractor chewing on a bag of rocks, his windscreen already smeared with oil, his hands already shaking, not from fear, from something else, something that had been building since March, 3 months earlier. Truk Lagoon. A different sky, a different kind of pain. Lieutenant William Decker Dutch, to everyone who knew him, which was everyone on the Lexington, flew wing position off Vreeland's right quarter, 26 years old, Pennsylvania coal country accent, laughed too loud, wrote letters to a girl named Sarah every single night, had a photograph of her taped to his instrument panel, her face smiling out at him through the plexiglass while he hunted men for a living. They were strafing Japanese positions on Dublin Island when the 3 Zeros bounced them from the sun. Standard ambush, nothing fancy, just good positioning and patience. Dutch saw them coming, called it out, broke hard left and opened fire at 600 yards with his 50 caliber Brownings. Standard ammunition load, 2 armor-piercing rounds, 1 incendiary, 1 tracer. The tracer burned bright orange-red, a glowing line in the sky that showed Dutch exactly where his bullets were going. It also showed the 3 Zero pilots exactly where Dutch was. They followed the tracer stream back to its source, like wolves following blood in snow. Vreeland screamed into his radio, told Dutch to break right dive anything, but radios only work if the other pilot is still alive to hear them. The Zeros converged from 3 angles. 37mm cannon shells and 7.7mm machine gun rounds chewed through the Hellcat's engine, through the cockpit, through Dutch. The self-sealing fuel tanks tried to do their job, tried to seal around the punctures, but there were too many holes, and one of them was in the wrong place. The fuel ignited, not a fireball, not an explosion, just a sudden bloom of orange flame that wrapped around the entire aircraft like a fist closing. Vreeland watched his best friend try to bail out, watched him get the canopy open, watched him half stand in the cockpit, one boot on the seat, both hands reaching for the sky. Then the flames reached the main fuel tank and Dutch just stopped being there. The Hellcat became a meteor trailing black smoke and burning aluminum, spinning end over end toward the blue water below. No parachute, no radio call, just gone. Vreeland broke every rule in the fighter pilot handbook. He dove after the burning wreck instead of engaging the Zeros. He followed it all the way down to 500 feet, close enough to see individual pieces separating from the airframe, close enough to see that there was no pilot anymore, just fire. The Zeros let him go. Professional courtesy, maybe, or maybe they just recognized grief when they saw it. Vreeland pulled out at 200 feet, his vision tunneled to a grey pinpoint, his G-suit inflated so hard it felt like a vice around his legs and chest. He climbed back to altitude in silence, flew the patrol route in silence, landed in silence. That night, while the rest of the squadron played cards and smoked lucky strikes and pretended they weren't all thinking about empty chairs at breakfast, Alexander Vreeland sat alone in the armory with a disassembled 50 caliber ammunition belt spread across a workbench. He picked up a tracer round, turned it over in his hands. It looked identical to the armor-piercing rounds except for the red paint on the tip. But it wasn't identical. It was lighter, different weight, different ballistics, different trajectory at long range. And it burned. It burned bright enough to be seen from 3 miles away on a clear day. It was a lie, a glowing lie, that told pilots they were aiming true while actually showing them a trajectory that diverged from their real bullets by 6 inches at 600 yards. And worse, far worse, it was a beacon, a sign in the sky that said, "Here I am, please shoot back." Vreeland set the tracer round down and picked up a different cartridge, silver tip. M8 API, armor-piercing incendiary, 647 grains of copper-jacketed lead wrapped around a magnesium thermite core that ignited on impact at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to burn through aluminum like a blowtorch through butter. Hot enough to turn fuel vapor into instant combustion. He had read everything the Navy had on the Japanese A6M0. Knew it was fast, agile, beloved by its pilots. Knew it could outturn a Hellcat at low speeds, could outclimb it below 10,000 feet. Knew it was a beautiful airplane, a perfect marriage of engineering and philosophy, designed by men who understood that air combat was art. But he also knew something the manual writers in Washington didn't seem to understand. To make the Zero light enough to dance in the sky, Japanese engineers had stripped out everything heavy. No armor plating behind the pilot's seat, no rubber self-sealing lining in the fuel tanks, just bare aluminum and gasoline. An American Hellcat was a flying tank, 12,598 pounds fully loaded. You could punch holes in it all day and it would keep flying, the rubber fuel bladders squeezing shut around the bullet holes, the pilot protected by a 1/4-inch steel plate and a layer of bulletproof glass. A Zero was different. 5,313 pounds, a third the weight, a third the protection. If you punched a hole in a Zero with standard ammunition, the pilot might not even notice. The air whistled through the hole and nothing changed. But if you hit it with this, Vreeland held the M8 round up to the light, you didn't poke a hole. You created fire. Instant catastrophic fire. The theory was simple. The proof would require breaking every rule Master Chief Horace Pittman had ever enforced. Pittman was 45 years old and had been loading aircraft guns since before Vreeland learned to shave. He had a face like a catcher's mitt and hands that could assemble a Browning M2 machine gun blindfolded in under 3 minutes. He believed in regulations the way other men believed in God. Absolute, unchanging, tested by time, and written in the blood of men who learned the hard way. He found Vreeland in the armory at 0200 hours, surrounded by ammunition belts, his khaki uniform shirt hanging open, his hands black with gun oil. "What are you doing, Lieutenant?" Vreeland didn't look up. He was feeding M8 rounds into a canvas belt, one after another, the brass casings clicking together in a rhythm that sounded almost like prayer. "Loading ammunition, Chief." "That's my job." "Then I'm helping." Pittman stepped closer, saw the pile of tracer rounds sitting unused on the bench, saw the belt feeding through Vreeland's hands, every single cartridge topped with a silver tip. "That's a hot belt, pure incendiary. You'll cook the barrels." "No, I won't." "You'll jam the guns." "No, I won't." "Navy regulations specify." "Navy regulations killed Dutch Decker." Vreeland's hands stopped moving. He looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, 48 hours without sleep. Tracer rounds gave away his position. 3 Zeros tracked him through his own ammunition and burned him alive. "I watched it happen, Chief. I watched my best friend die because we're shooting ammunition designed by people who've never been shot at." Pittman's jaw worked. He wanted to argue, wanted to pull rank, cited, chapter and verse from the Ordnance Manual, remind this college-educated lieutenant that there were reasons for regulations, that smarter men than both of them had spent years developing the standard belt, that individual pilots didn't get to just decide they knew better. But he had also watched Dutch Decker's Hellcat fall out of the sky, had watched them fish pieces of the wreckage out of the ocean, had helped inventory what came back. There wasn't enough left to fill a sea bag. "One sortie," Pittman said finally. "You get one chance to prove this works. You load those guns with pure M8, you fly one combat mission, And if you don't come back with results, I personally ground you. Understood? Understood. And if you jam those guns and get yourself killed, I'm going to be very disappointed. Noted, Chief? Pittman watched him work for another minute. Then he did something he had never done in 23 years of Navy service. He helped. He pulled up a stool and started feeding silver-tipped rounds into a second belt, his thick fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "Why pure incendiary?" Pittman asked. "Why not keep some AP rounds, some variety?" "Because I don't need to shred them, Chief. I just need to light them. The Zero has no self-sealing tanks, no armor. Hit them with standard rounds and they leak. Hit them with this and they burn instantly. And with no tracers, they won't see me coming until it's too late." "You're betting your life on a theory." "I'm betting my life that math works better than hope." They loaded 6 guns, 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds total, every single cartridge an M8 armor-piercing incendiary. Not a single tracer in the bunch. Invisible ammunition, invisible fire. The next morning, May 7th, 1944, Vreeland flew a routine combat air patrol over the fleet. 4 Hellcats, standard formation, 2 hours of boredom at 12,000 feet, watching an empty sky, listening to the engine drone. Then the radio crackled. 2 bogies inbound, zeros, probably reconnaissance trying to find the American carriers report their position. Vreeland's flight leader took the first one, standard engagement. Dove from altitude fired a long burst, the tracer rounds arcing out like Roman candles. The Zero saw them coming, broke hard right, escaped into a cloud bank. Vreeland took the second one. He came in from the sun, same as everyone was taught. Dove hard building speed, the Hellcat's weight working in his favor. The Zero pilot never saw him. No tracers to give him away, just a Hellcat materializing out of the glare like a ghost. Vreeland waited until he was 600 yards out. 500. 400. Other pilots would have opened fire by now, spraying and praying, hoping something connected. He waited. 300 yards. 200. Close enough to see the pilot's head in the cockpit, see the meatball insignia on the fuselage, see the rivets in the aluminum skin. 150 yards. He squeezed the trigger. A short burst, less than a second. 68 rounds. The result was immediate and terrifying. The M8 rounds slammed into the Zero's wing root where the fuel tanks lived. The magnesium thermite cores ignited on contact. There was no smoke, no slow burn, no trail of leaking fuel, just a sudden violent eruption of orange fire. The Zero didn't fall, it dissolved. 1 second it was an airplane, the next it was a fireball tumbling end over end toward the ocean pieces, breaking off the pilot's parachute, deploying too late, the whole thing over in less than 3 seconds. Vreeland pulled up, used his dive speed to zoom back to altitude. His hands were steady on the stick, his breathing was even. He checked his ammunition counters. 6 guns, 68 rounds expended total, 2,332 rounds remaining. Theory worked, the math was perfect. But there was a second Zero, the one that got away from the flight leader. It came back, saw its wingman burning, saw Vreeland's Hellcat climbing alone. Vreeland lined up the shot, same approach, same patience. Closed to 200 yards, started to squeeze the trigger, and hesitated. 1.4 seconds, an eternity in air combat. He saw Dutch's face superimposed over the gun sight, saw the flames, saw the spinning fall. His finger froze on the trigger for 1.4 seconds. The Zero pilot saw him, broke hard left, dove for the deck, escaped. Vreeland came home with 1 kill, 68 rounds expended, textbook efficiency. But the second one got away, because when it mattered, when the shot was there, he flinched. The squadron reaction was immediate and brutal. "You used how much ammo?" "Pure M8, are you insane? That's the suicide mix. You're going to cook your barrels and jam mid-fight." Professor Crazy strikes again. They called him Wrench, short for Grease Monkey, which was short for the weird lieutenant who spent more time in the maintenance bay than the ready room. The guy who asked too many questions about ammunition ballistics and engine performance. The guy who couldn't just fly the airplane and shoot the bad guys like a normal person. Commander Harris called him into his office that afternoon. Desk stacked with paperwork. Photographs of wife and kids in silver frames. A man who wanted to survive the war and go home to Oregon and never think about any of this again. "Lieutenant Vreeland, I've read your after-action report. 1. Kill non-standard ammunition load, deliberate deviation from established doctrine. Would you like to explain yourself?" "The ammunition worked, sir. Instant combustion, minimal rounds expended." And the second Zero, silence. "You had a shot according to your wingman, and you didn't take it. Why?" Hesitation, sir. Won't happen again. It better not, because if you're going to break the rules, you better be right every single time. Understood? Yes, sir. Stick to Doctrine Vreeland, or transfer to transport. Your choice. That night, Vreeland sat in his bunk and did math in a notebook. He replayed the engagement in his head, calculated the angles, measured the hesitation. 1.4 seconds. The zero had been in his sights for 1.4 seconds, and he hadn't fired. Not because the ammunition was wrong, because he was. He wrote a single sentence at the bottom of the page. Next time, no hesitation, math only. He didn't know it then, but next time was coming in 43 days. And it wouldn't be 2 zeros, it would be 50 aircraft. And he would have 8 minutes to prove everyone wrong or die trying. June 18th, 1944. The day before, everything changed. The intelligence briefing in the Lexington's ready room was standing room only. Every pilot, every aircrew, every officer who could squeeze through the door. The air smelled like sweat and coffee, and the particular anxiety that comes from knowing something very bad is about to happen. The intelligence officer was a lieutenant commander with round glasses and a pointer stick. He tapped the map of the Philippine Sea where little magnetic symbols represented the Japanese fleet. Operation A-Joe, Admiral Ozawa is betting the farm. 9 carriers, 473 aircraft confirmed. Their plan is simple: overwhelm our defenses through sheer numbers. Launch everything at once, create a wall of aircraft our fighters can't possibly stop. Someone in the back whispered a curse. Our job is equally simple. Stop them. All of them. If those bombers get through to our carriers, we lose the fleet. We lose the Pacific. We lose the war. After the briefing, Vreeland found Pittman in the hangar deck. The chief was supervising maintenance on a Hellcat that had thrown a prop governor during the previous day's patrol. His khaki uniform was soaked through with sweat. It was 98 degrees in the hangar. No breeze, just the smell of aviation gas and hot metal. Chief, I need to talk to you about ammunition. Pittman didn't look up from the engine he was inspecting. Let me guess. You want the invisible rounds again? Yes, sir. Navy just issued an order. All fighters are to be loaded with standard mix for tomorrow's operation. Commander's orders, no exceptions. Chief, I said no exceptions, Lieutenant.
Lieutenant Pittman straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag. You think I don't know what you're planning? You think I'm stupid? I think you know the math works. The math? Jesus, Vreeland, you know what your problem is? You think war is math? It's not. It's chaos, and chaos doesn't care about your theories. Dutch died because of standard ammunition. How many more have to die before we admit it's not working? Pittman's face went dark. For a moment, Vreeland thought he had pushed too far, that the chief was going to have him thrown in the brig for insubordination. Then Pittman's shoulders sagged. My nephew, Ernest, 19 years old, seaman apprentice on the Hornet when she went down at Santa Cruz. Japanese bombers got through because our fighters couldn't stop them fast enough. Standard ammunition, standard tactics. Kid drowned in burning oil. They never found the body. He looked at Vreeland with eyes that had seen too much. You load those guns yourself.
You do it after midnight when no one's watching. And if anyone asks, I didn't see a damn thing. Clear. Clear, Chief. And Vreeland, you better come back, because if you die out there with my unauthorized ammunition in your guns, they'll court-martial me, and I'm too old to spend the rest of the war in Portsmouth. That night, at 0200 hours, Vreeland climbed down into the armory with a flashlight and a prayer. He found the M8 ammunition exactly where Pittman had left it. 2,400 rounds, all silver-tipped, all waiting. He loaded the belts himself, fed them into the ammunition bays in Hellcat number 23. 6 Browning M2 machine guns, 400 rounds per gun, not a single tracer, not a single standard round, just invisible fire. When he finished, he climbed into the cockpit and sat in the darkness, his hands on the controls, his eyes closed. He thought about Dutch, thought about Ernest Pittman, thought about all the men who had died because someone decided regulations were more important than reality. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil, wrote a letter to his mother by flashlight. Mum, tomorrow I'm going to do something stupid or something brilliant. I honestly don't know which. If this works, I'm a genius. If it doesn't, tell Dutch I'll see him soon. Tell him I'm sorry I didn't shoot faster. Love, Alex. He folded the letter, put it in his footlocker and tried to sleep. He managed maybe 2 hours. June 19th, 0900 hours. Flight deck of the USS Lexington. The carrier was alive with organized chaos. Deck crew in colored jerseys, yellow for directors, green for catapult operators, red for ordnance, blue for everyone else. Hellcats and Corsairs spotted on the deck wings, folded engines, silent, waiting. Vreeland walked the flight line looking for his aircraft. Found it tucked behind two SB-2C Helldivers, its wings still folded, engine cowling still closed. Number 23, a yellow shirt, stopped him. "Sir, you can't fly that one. She's red-tagged. Supercharger bearings shot." "I know." "You know, sir, regulations say." "I know what regulations say. I'm flying 23. "But," "I said I'm flying 23. The yellow shirt looked at him like he was insane. Then he shrugged. Not his life, not his problem. This was the second twist. The moment Alexander Vreeland deliberately chose a broken aircraft because it guaranteed no one would steal his plane and his ammunition before launch. The regulations said ground it. Mathematics said fly it. Vreeland chose mathematics. He climbed up the ladder, swung his leg over the cockpit rail, dropped into the seat. Home. The cockpit smelled like hydraulic fluid and sweat and fear, same as always. He started his pre-flight check. Magnetos, fuel selector, mixture props. Everything by the book except for the airplane itself and the ammunition in its guns, and the entire theory he was about to bet his life on. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 coughed to life with a bark of blue smoke and a rattle that made the entire airframe shudder. 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, 2,000 horsepower, and right now it sounded like a cement mixer full of hammers. Oil pressure came up, 65 psi, should have been 75. Close enough for government work, close enough to die. The deck officer appeared on the wing, checked his harness, checked his oxygen, gave him a thumbs up that said, "You're either brave or crazy." Probably both. 10:03 a.m. The deck officer stepped back, raised his flag, started the launch sequence. Vreeland ran the engine up to full power, feeling the whole airplane shake, feeling the oil temperature climb, feeling every bad bearing and worn seal and questionable decision that had led to this moment. The deck officer dropped his flag. The catapult fired. 5,000 pounds of thrust kicked Vreeland in the spine. The Hellcat shot down, the deck dipped toward the water as it left. The bow hung there for a terrible second while physics decided whether he would fly or swim. Then the big propeller bit air and he climbed. Gear up, flaps up, trim for cruise. The engine sounded like it was eating itself, but it was making power, and that was enough. He climbed through 12,000 feet into clear sky. Radio chatter filled his helmet. Bogies inbound, many bogies. Vector 270. He kept climbing. 15,000, 18,000, 20,000. The supercharger whined and rattled, but it kept feeding air to the engine, and the engine kept running, and that was all he could ask. 24,000 feet. He was above the enemy formation now, above the weather, above the fear. Just him and the math and a sky about to catch fire. The formation appeared below him like a disease, stacked in layers, torpedo bombers, low-dive bombers in the middle zeros high, at least 50 aircraft in visual range, maybe more. A migration of aluminum and death. They were flying straight and level, confident, safe in their numbers. They were wrong. Vreeland positioned the sun at his 6 o'clock, checked his fuel, 250 gallons, checked his ammunition, 2,400 rounds, checked his courage, found it lacking, did it anyway. He rolled inverted and dove toward the first kill that would change naval aviation forever. The dive was pure physics. Mass times acceleration equals force, and right now Alexander Vreeland had more force than most pilots would ever experience in their entire careers. The airspeed indicator wound up like a clock spring, 300 knots, 350, 400. The Hellcat's 12,600 pounds became a guided missile pointed at the heart of the Japanese formation. At 400 knots, the vibration from the broken engine smoothed out, a temporary peace. The laws of aerodynamics taking over from the laws of mechanical failure. The wind screamed over the canopy so loud it drowned out the radio, drowned out thought, drowned out everything except the mathematics of intercept angles and closure rates and the exact moment to pull the trigger. Vreeland picked his target with the cold precision of a surgeon selecting where to cut. The Judy dive bomber on the left edge of the formation, Yokosuka D4Y2 Suisei, empty weight 4,900 pounds, crew of 2, no armor, fuel tanks in the wing roots exactly where the M8 rounds would do maximum damage. Pilot looked young even from 1,000 yards out, fighting to hold position in the formation. Probably fresh from training, maybe 50 flight hours total sent up here because Japan was running out of experienced pilots and had to fill the sky with whoever could keep a plane straight and level. 150 yards. Vreeland could see the inspection stencils on the fuselage now, could see the panel lines, could see the rear gunner's head turning, scanning for threats, but looking in the wrong direction because there were no tracer rounds to warn him where death was coming from. Vreeland's finger tightened on the trigger. He squeezed. 0.8 seconds, 68 rounds. 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns cycled at 800 rounds per minute each. The math was simple. 800 divided by 60 equals 13.3 rounds per second per gun, times 6 guns equals 80 rounds per second total. 0.8 seconds times 80 equals 64 rounds plus 4 more, because the trigger pull wasn't perfectly timed. 68 silver-tipped messengers of fire converged on a point 18 inches in diameter on the Judy's wing root. The M8 armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through the aluminum skin like it was tissue paper. The magnesium thermite cores ignited on impact. 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The temperature of a cutting torch. The temperature at which aviation gasoline doesn't burn, it detonates. The fuel tanks didn't leak, didn't smoke, didn't give the pilot time to realize something was wrong. They exploded. The wings separated from the fuselage. The tail section broke off. The cockpit became a fireball containing 2 men who had been alive 0.8 seconds ago and were now physics problems involving combustion and gravity. The whole thing took 2.1 seconds from trigger pull to wreckage falling toward the ocean. Vreeland pulled up hard, 6.2 Gs, his G-suit inflated, squeezing his legs and abdomen, forcing blood back up to his brain. His vision grayed at the edges but held. He used his dive speed to zoom, climb back toward the sun, back toward invisibility, back toward the position of advantage. He checked his mirrors. The fireball was tumbling down, trailing black smoke like a signature in the sky that said, Alexander Vreeland was here. He checked his ammunition counters, 2,332 rounds remaining. Below him, the Japanese formation rippled like a pond when a stone hits the surface. Pilots jerking their heads around, radio calls in Japanese, confusion, panic. Where did it come from? Who fired? I saw no traces. The invisible fire was working exactly as predicted. Vreeland was already selecting target number 2. He picked a Judy in the center of the formation. Harder shot. Surrounded by other aircraft. If he missed, if his aim was off by even 2 degrees, he would overshoot directly into the Zero fighter screen above and die in a crossfire he couldn't survive. He wasn't planning to miss. He rolled inverted and dropped again. 400 knots, 420, 440. The Hellcat groaned under the stress, but Grumman built these things to take punishment and keep flying. This time the rear gunner saw him. A stream of 7.7mm rounds zipped past Vreeland's canopy. Little angry fireflies, the Japanese Type 92 machine gun was a good weapon. Reliable, accurate enough. But good wasn't enough when your target was diving at you at 440 knots from out of the sun with 650s and absolutely zero fear of return fire. Vreeland ignored the incoming rounds. He had done the math. At this closure rate and deflection angle, the probability of being hit was less than 3%. He would take those odds every single time. 100 yards, point-blank range. Close enough to see the rear gunner's face, young and terrified, frantically working the charging handle on his jammed gun. Close enough to see him give up and just stare at the American fighter bearing down on him with the acceptance of a man who knows death is here. Vreeland fired, 1.2 seconds, 92 rounds. The stream of M8 incendiaries walked across the Judy's engine, cowling like a chainsaw cutting through wood. They hit the Kinsei radial engine, hit the magnesium engine block, hit the oil reservoir. Magnesium burns white hot when it ignites. 4,000 degrees at the core, hotter than thermite, hotter than anything that should exist in the sky. The Judy's engine didn't fail. It vaporized. The propeller suddenly freed from its mounts, spun away into the blue sky like a discarded pinwheel. The bomber pitched up violently from the sudden loss of thrust, and torque stalled, rolled, inverted, and began its final tumble toward the ocean, 12,000 feet below. 2 kills. 3 minutes 20 seconds elapsed since first trigger pull. Vreeland pulled up, climbed, repositioned. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. His heart rate was elevated, but controlled. This wasn't fear anymore. This was flow state. This was a man operating at the absolute peak of human capability, where training and instinct and mathematics converged into something that looked like magic, but was just applied physics, and the refusal to believe the manual knew better than reality. He checked his ammunition counters. 160 rounds expended. 2,240 remaining. 6 aircraft destroyed would require 478 rounds if he maintained this average. He had enough ammunition to kill 14 more aircraft at this rate. The math was working. But the hive was waking up. 12 Mitsubishi A6M50 fighters broke from the top of the formation and rolled inverted into attack dives. Their pilots were good, experienced. These weren't the green kids flying the bombers. These were the men who had survived Midway and Guadalcanal and every other meat grinder the Pacific had become. They were coming for Vreeland with professional fury and tactical discipline, and they were making a mistake. They were assuming this would be a dogfight, a turning contest where the Zero's superior maneuverability would win. They were assuming the American pilot would fight by the rules, would turn and twist and dance in the sky like fighters were supposed to fight. Vreeland had no intention of dancing. He watched them commit to their dive, watched them accelerate, watched them reach 420 knots, which was fast for a Zero nearly at the edge of their structural envelope. Then he shoved his stick forward. Negative G. His stomach tried to exit through his throat. The loose map in his knee pocket floated up toward the canopy. A bead of sweat that had been running down his temple suddenly reversed direction and floated toward the ceiling. The Hellcat's nose dropped toward the ocean and kept dropping. Airspeed built like a runaway train. 400 knots, 420, 450, 480. The structural limit for an F6, F3. Hellcat was 485 knots, indicated airspeed. Past that, the wings would begin to flutter, the tail would oscillate, and eventually something critical would separate from the aircraft and the airplane would become a collection of parts, traveling in approximately the same direction, but no longer connected. Vreeland was at 480 and still accelerating. Behind him, the Zeros tried to follow. Their pilots were brave, skilled. They pushed their sticks forward and dove after the American who had just killed 2 of their charges. At 420 knots, the first Zero started to shake. Wing flutter. The lightweight construction that made the Zero so beautifully agile at 200 knots became a deadly liability at 420. The pilot, feeling his aircraft begin to come apart around him, pulled back on the stick and climbed back to safety. At 440 knots, 3 more Zeros pulled out. Their airframes simply couldn't handle the stress. They were designed for turning, for climbing, for dancing, not for this kind of brutal physics. Vreeland pulled out of his dive at 6.5 Gs. His vision didn't just grey, it went completely black for a full second. G-Elog. G-force induced loss of consciousness. He was awake, but his brain wasn't getting blood, and for one terrible moment he was flying blind, trusting muscle memory and the G-suit and the fact that he had done this exact maneuver 17 times in training and his hands knew what to do even when his brain was offline. His vision came back like someone turning up a dimmer switch, grey to colour to full clarity. He was level at 8,000 feet, directly beneath the Japanese bomber formation. The remaining Zeros were still at 15,000 feet, regrouping, trying to figure out where the American had gone. Vreeland looked up through the top of his canopy. The belly of a Judy bomber passed directly overhead, maybe 200 yards above him. Pale blue paint, rising sun insignia on the wings, completely unaware that death was directly beneath it. The gunners couldn't shoot down, their weapons wouldn't depress to that angle, and the Zeros couldn't shoot without hitting their own bombers. Vreeland had just turned their numerical superiority into a liability. He was using their own formation as a shield. The fox was in the hen house and the farmer couldn't shoot without killing chickens. This was the genius of invisible ammunition. No tracers meant no warning, and no warning meant he could take positions that would be suicide if the enemy knew where he was. He pulled the Hellcat's nose up gently, not aggressive, just a slow, controlled climb that brought him into position beneath another Judy, range 200 yards. Closing. The target was flying straight and level, probably a young pilot concentrating so hard on formation flying that he wasn't watching for threats, probably thinking about home, about family, about anything except the fact that he had less than 10 seconds to live. 100 yards, Vreeland fired, 1.1 seconds, 85 rounds. The M8 rounds hit the bomber's belly fuel tank, dead center. The thin aluminum skin might as well have been tissue paper. The rounds punched through and ignited the fuel vapor inside. A fuel tank is a bomb waiting for someone to light the fuse. The liquid fuel won't explode. But the vapor above the liquid, that's a different story. That's a mixture of air and gasoline in perfect stoichiometric ratio, just waiting for ignition. Vreeland gave it 85 ignition sources traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The Judy's center fuselage blew apart. The wings separated. The tail broke off. The cockpit section, empty of life, tumbled forward and down. 3 kills. 4 minutes, 18 seconds total elapsed time. Vreeland banked hard left to avoid the debris field. Something that looked like a seat cushion tumbled past his right wing close enough to make him flinch. A section of wing skin with the paint still on it spun past his canopy, close enough that he could see the individual rivet holes. He didn't watch the wreckage fall. There was no time for reflection. No time to process what he was doing. That would come later. Right now there was only the next target, and the next target was different. This Judy pilot was older, more experienced. He saw Vreeland coming and reacted instantly. The bomber banked hard right, spoiling the easy shot. Then it barrel-rolled, a dive bomber doing aerobatics, something that wasn't in any manual but might buy a few more seconds of life for the men inside. Vreeland felt something unexpected. Respect. This pilot was good, professional, doing his job, trying to survive, protecting his gunner, making Vreeland work for this kill. In another world, in another time, they might have shared a drink and talked about aerodynamics and engine performance and all the things pilots talk about when they're not trying to kill each other. But this was war, and war didn't allow for respect or friendship or the acknowledgement that the man you were about to kill was probably a decent person doing his duty, same as you. Vreeland didn't aim where the plane was, he aimed where physics said it had to be. The bomber was banking right, which meant it was bleeding airspeed, which meant it would have to roll back left to maintain altitude and speed. Vreeland put his gun sight 3 aircraft lengths ahead of the Judy's nose, led the target like shooting skeet, kicked his rudder pedal, skidding the Hellcat sideways to get the perfect angle, waited. The Judy rolled back left exactly where mathematics and aerodynamics predicted it would be. Vreeland fired. 1.6 seconds, 104 rounds. The stream of M8 incendiaries caught the Judy in a diagonal line from tail to nose. They walked across the fuselage like cutting steel with an acetylene torch. Hit the empennage. Hit the wing root. Hit the engine. The aircraft came apart in stages. First, the tail separated the control cables, severed the whole assembly, tumbling away. Then the wings folded up under the stress of the maneuver without the tail to provide stability. Then the engine exploded in a white-hot flash of burning magnesium. But this time the explosion happened 100 yards directly in front of Vreeland's flight path. The fireball expanded at 600 feet per second, orange and black and white-hot at the core, a mushroom cloud of flame and smoke and shrapnel that filled his entire windscreen in less time than it took for a human heart to beat twice. There was no time to turn, no time to climb, no time to do anything except grip the stick with both hands and fly straight into the inferno. This was the third major twist, the moment where the invisible fire could have killed its creator. The world turned orange. Heat slammed through the cockpit like opening a furnace door. The temperature spiked from 85 degrees Fahrenheit to 140 degrees in less than a second. Vreeland's flight suit, already damp with sweat, became soaked. The plexiglass canopy creaked under thermal stress. The rubber seal around the windscreen began to smoke. Sound penetrated even through his leather helmet and radio headset. A bass rumble he felt in his chest cavity, in his sinuses, in his bones. The roar of combustion and disintegration happening at a volume that shouldn't exist. Debris hammered the Hellcat's wings and fuselage. The sound was like standing inside a tin shed during a hailstorm made of aluminum and steel. Clang, clang, clang. Each impact a potential catastrophic failure. Each piece of shrapnel a lottery ticket that might punch through the oil cooler or sever a control cable or crack the propeller hub or penetrate the cockpit and end Alexander Vreeland in ways that would make identification difficult. His vision was nothing. Complete whiteout. The windscreen coated in soot and burning oil and atomized aluminum and God knew what else from the disintegrating bomber. Vreeland flew blind for 1.2 seconds, flew on instruments, kept the artificial horizon level, kept the airspeed steady at 400 knots, trusted the airplane to keep flying even though he couldn't see where he was going or what he was flying into. Then he emerged on the other side. The windscreen was destroyed, not shattered. That would have been better. It was completely opaque, solid carbon coating, zero visibility forward. He could see through the side quarter panels. If he craned his neck, could look out the small windows on either side of the cockpit, but the main windscreen was useless. He looked down at his wings. The paint was scorched, bubbled, blackened. There were impact dents. He counted 14 distinct points where debris had hit hard enough to leave permanent deformation in the aluminum skin, but the wings were still there. The ailerons still moved when he tested them. The structure held. He was still flying. He checked the engine instruments. Oil pressure 63 psi and dropping. Temperature 228 degrees and climbing. The engine was running rough, missing on at least 2 cylinders, making sounds like rocks in a blender. but it was running. He checked his ammunition counters. 407 rounds expended out of 2,400. 1,993 rounds remaining. 5 kills in 6 minutes 40 seconds. He checked his fuel. 67 gallons remaining. Approximately 21 minutes of flight time at current consumption rate, less if he had to use combat power. The mathematics were still working, but the variables were changing. The engine was dying, the windscreen was blind, and there was still work to do. Below him, one more Judy was struggling to catch up to the formation, a straggler, flying lower, slower, heavy. Vreeland looked closer through his side window. Underneath the Judy's belly, mounted on external racks, was a Type 91 aerial torpedo. 1,840 pounds of high explosive wrapped in a streamlined case designed to be dropped at low altitude to run just beneath the surface of the ocean, to slam into the hull of an aircraft carrier and detonate below the waterline where armor was thinnest and damage would be catastrophic if that torpedo bomber reached the American fleet, if it penetrated the combat air patrol, if it got into attack position and dropped its weapon and that weapon ran. True, USS Lexington, CV-16, crew complement 2,100 sailors and airmen. The equation was simple: 1 Japanese pilot and 1 gunner versus 2,100 American lives. Alexander Vreeland had never been good at trolley problems in college philosophy class. He had always argued they were theoretical nonsense because real life didn't present such clean choices. He was wrong. Real life just presented him with exactly that choice. Pull the lever or don't. Kill 2 or let 2,000 die. The math was brutal. The math was clear. He pushed the throttle to full military power. The engine screamed in protest. 2,800 RPM. 60 inches of manifold pressure. The oil temperature climbed past every red line ever painted on a gauge. 240 degrees, 250, 260, into territory where the oil was breaking down, losing viscosity, becoming something closer to water than lubricant. Every second at this power setting was eating years off the engine's life. Except the engine didn't have years. It had minutes, maybe. But every second mattered because the torpedo bomber was getting closer to the fleet, and Vreeland was the only thing between that torpedo and 2,100 men. The Judy was flying at 195 knots, heavy, with its payload. The Hellcat was doing 340 knots, burning its engine alive to make that speed. Closure rate 145 knots. Range 800 yards. Time to intercept 43 seconds. Vreeland watched the numbers count down in his head. 700 yards, 600, 500. At 200 yards he could see details through his side window. The torpedo slung beneath the fuselage, deadly and patient. The rear gunner in his position, head on a swivel, looking for threats, looking at Vreeland. The gunner was young, maybe 18, maybe 19. Hard to tell from 200 yards, but Vreeland could see enough, could see the kid's eyes go wide, could see him frantically trying to clear his jammed Type 92 machine gun, yanking on the charging handle, panic making him clumsy, making him slow, making him human. Could see him look back one last time with eyes that knew exactly what was about to happen and couldn't do anything to stop it. Vreeland had a thought, sudden and unbidden. That kid has a mother. Maybe a girl waiting at home, maybe dreams about what he'll do after the war. Maybe he's a decent person who got drafted into this and is just trying to survive same as everyone else. Then he had another thought, colder and harder. So do 2,100 sailors on my carrier. War is mathematics with a moral weight. The numbers were clear, the weight was unbearable. He had to carry it anyway. He closed to 50 yards, extreme close range. Closer than training allowed, closer than was safe. Close enough to see rivets on the tail section, close enough to see the inspection stencils, close enough to see the rear gunner give up on his gun and just stare at the Hellcat, his face a mixture of fear and acceptance and something that might have been understanding. Vreeland whispered 2 words into his oxygen mask that no one would ever hear. "I'm sorry." Then he fired. 0.9 seconds, 71 rounds. He didn't aim for the fuselage, didn't aim for the engine, he aimed for the tail section, for the vertical stabilizer and rudder that provided directional control. The M8 rounds cut through the aluminum structure like a chainsaw through balsa wood. The tail assembly, held on by stringers and rivets and prayers, simply separated from the fuselage. An airplane without a tail is aerodynamically unstable, uncontrollable, subject only to the whims of airflow and center of gravity and the certainty of physics. The Judy pitched up violently, the sudden loss of tail authority causing an immediate stall. The nose went vertical. The aircraft hung there for half a second, suspended in defiance of gravity. Then it rolled inverted, and fell. The torpedo broke free from its mounts, tumbled into the ocean, sank without detonating. The bomber followed it down, spinning the pilot and gunner, thrown around inside the cockpit like dice in a cup, conscious and aware and helpless as the water rushed up to meet them. Vreeland pulled up and banked away. He didn't watch the impact, didn't want to see the splash, didn't want to think about two young men drowning in their cockpit while their lungs filled with seawater and darkness. 6 kills. 7 minutes 58 seconds total combat time. 478 rounds expended out of 2,400 total, 79.6 rounds per kill. The United States Navy standard doctrine said it took over 1,000 rounds to kill a single enemy aircraft. Alexander Vreeland had just proven that number was 1,255% too high. He had proven his theory, had vindicated Pittman's faith, had justified every regulation he'd broken and every doubt he'd ignored. But he wasn't done yet because the oil pressure gauge just hit 32 psi and dropping fast. And because he had just flown deep enough into the battle that he was now inside the anti-aircraft envelope of the American fleet, and the American fleet was about to try very hard to kill him. The first 5-inch shell exploded 60 feet from his right wingtip. Vreeland felt the shockwave before his ears registered the sound, a physical slap of overpressure that rocked the Hellcat sideways, that made his teeth click together, that reminded him that getting killed by your own side was just as permanent as getting killed by the enemy. Then came the boom. The sound of 40 pounds of high explosive detonating in a proximity-fused shell that was designed to kill aircraft and didn't particularly care whose aircraft it killed. Below him, the battleship USS Indiana, BB-58, was fully engaged. Every 5-inch 38 caliber dual-purpose gun on the starboard side was firing. Crews working in practiced synchronization, loading and firing and loading again, putting up a wall of steel and fire between their fleet and the Japanese attack. The gunners on the Indiana saw an aircraft. They saw soot and smoke and battle damage. They saw something approaching from the direction of the enemy. They saw a silhouette they couldn't quite identify because Vreeland was above them, backlit against the sky, his Hellcat covered in carbon and scorching that obscured the White Star insignia. They saw a target. They engaged. Another shell burst 50 feet behind him. Shrapnel sleeted through the air, thousands of fragments of steel case moving at supersonic velocity. Vreeland heard them hit the fuselage, multiple impacts. Ting, 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 ting. 7 holes punched through the aluminum skin, ragged and smoking. One fragment came through the cockpit, missed Vreeland's head by 6 inches, embedded itself in the instrument panel, shattering the glass face of the altimeter. Vreeland grabbed his radio transmitter, keyed the microphone. "Ceasefire, friendly aircraft Navy Hellcat, ceasefire." Static, nothing but static. He looked down at his radio panel. The master switch was off. He had turned it off 40 minutes ago when the fighter direction officer ordered him to return to base. He had been flying in radio silence this entire time alone with his mathematics and his ammunition and his choices. This was the 4th twist, the irony sharp enough to cut. He had survived 50 Japanese aircraft, had proven everyone wrong, had rewritten doctrine with invisible fire. And now the men he'd saved were trying to kill him because he couldn't tell them who he was. He flipped the radio master switch to on, keyed the mic again. "Lexington, this is Vreeland. Tell the fleet, stop shooting. I'm Navy. I'm one of the good guys." More static. Then a voice distant and crackling through interference. "Aircraft calling Lexington, squawk, IFF, and turn to heading 090. Vreeland reached for the IFF transponder. His hand was shaking, not fear, adrenaline dump. His body, realizing that the combat high was over and maybe it would like to process 8 minutes of sustained violence and terror. Now, please. He flipped the IFF to mode 3 emergency. The little black box under the instrument panel squawked out its coded signal, electronic proof that he was American-friendly, don't shoot. Another shell burst, this one 70 feet away. Still too close. The gunners were good, but not instant. Vreeland pushed the stick forward and dove for the deck, 50 feet above the Pacific Ocean, 340 knots. One wingtip 2 feet from the water, close enough that he could see individual whitecaps, close enough that one mistake would cartwheel him into the ocean at a speed that would turn the Hellcat into shrapnel and Alexander Vreeland into a memory. He banked hard, showed his belly to the fleet. The White Star insignia, clearly visible now, unmistakable, the universal symbol of American aircraft. The guns stopped firing. Vreeland's radio crackled. Hellcat at Angel 0.1, confirm you are Lieutenant Vreeland Lexington CAG. Affirmative, and I'd really appreciate it if you told the Indiana I'm on their side. Copy that. Fleet is checking fire. What's your status? Vreeland looked at his instrument panel. Oil pressure, 28 psi and still dropping. Temperature, 265 and climbing. Fuel, 18 gallons. Ammunition, 1,922 rounds remaining. Not that it mattered anymore because there was nothing left to shoot. Damaged but flyable. Engine failing. Requesting straight-in approach. Roger, you're cleared for immediate recovery. Nice work up there, sir. Nice work. As if he'd just completed a routine patrol instead of rewriting the book on aerial gunnery while flying a broken airplane through a fireball and nearly getting killed by his own fleet. Vreeland turned toward the Lexington. The carrier was 12 nautical miles away. 12 miles, 72,000 feet. He checked his fuel gauge again. 18 gallons. Fuel consumption at cruise power, 1.6 gallons per minute. Fuel required to cover 12 nautical miles at 180 knots, 8 minutes times 1.6 equals 12.8 gallons. Available fuel, 18 gallons. Margin, 5.2 gallons, 3.25 minutes, 195 seconds. The math worked, barely. He throttled back to cruise power. The engine temperature dropped slightly. 240 degrees, still hot, but no longer actively destroying itself. The oil pressure held steady at 28 pounds per square inch, below minimum, well into the danger zone, but holding. He flew toward home. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. At 4 miles out, the oil pressure gauge dropped to 0. Not 20 psi, not 15, 0. The engine had finally completely run out of oil. The bearings were now metal grinding on metal with no lubrication. Friction generating heat, heat generating expansion, expansion generating seizure. The Pratt & Whitney R2800. Double Wasp gave one last cough, one final protest against the laws of thermodynamics that said you cannot run an engine without oil and expect it to keep running. Then it seized solid. The propeller stopped turning, locked in place. A 3-blade monument to mechanical failure frozen against the sky. The sound changed from a roar to a whisper, just wind over the canopy, just the rush of air past the wings, just the sound of a 12,600-pound glider with the aerodynamic efficiency of a brick and a pilot whose mathematics just ran headfirst into reality. This was the 5th twist, the moment where all of Vreeland's calculations about ammunition and tactics meant nothing because physics had the final say, and physics said you're 4 miles from home with no engine and insufficient altitude, and you're going to die in the ocean about 800 yards short of safety. Vreeland checked his altitude, 2,400 feet. He did math in his head. The kind of math he'd been doing since he was 12 years old, the kind of math that felt more real than the reality outside his cockpit. The F6F3 Hellcat had a glide ratio of 8:1. For every 8 feet of forward travel, it dropped 1 foot of altitude. Current altitude 2,400 feet. Maximum glide distance 2,400 times 8 equals 19,200 feet. Distance to carrier 4 nautical miles equals 24,320 feet. Required glide distance minus available glide distance equals 5,120 feet. Shortfall, 5,120 feet. He was going to hit the water 853 yards short of the carrier. Close enough to see it, too far to reach it. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, not in naval aviation. Vreeland looked at the Lexington in the distance, looked at the ocean below him, looked at the instruments that couldn't help him anymore. Then he remembered something about energy management, about the fact that altitude and airspeed were just different forms of the same thing. Potential energy, kinetic energy, interchangeable, fungible. He could trade one for the other. He pushed the nose down, not a dive, just a shallow descent at 3 degrees below the horizon. The Hellcat accelerated 180 knots, 200, 220, 240, trading altitude for speed, bleeding height to build velocity. Then he pulled back gently on the stick, used that excess airspeed to climb. The nose came up. The aircraft pitched upward. The speed bled off, but the altitude increased. 2,600 feet, 2,800, 3,000. He'd just bought himself another 600 feet of altitude by trading speed, by using the physics of energy conversion the same way he'd used the physics of ammunition and the physics of dive speeds. Everything was mathematics if you looked at it right. He repeated the cycle. Shallow dive to build speed. Zoom climb to gain altitude. Over and over. Each cycle extending his glide by a few hundred precious feet. each cycle buying him yards toward home. At 2 miles out, he was at 3,100 feet. At 1 mile out, he was at 1,000 feet. At the carrier stern, he crossed at 800 feet altitude, descending at 200 feet per minute, his calculations and his reality finally converging in a single point that meant life instead of death. He reached for the landing gear lever, pulled it down. The left main gear extended, hydraulics working, 3 green lights for the wheel, the strut, the lock. The right main gear extended halfway, then jammed, red light, unsafe, unlocked. He tried the manual crank, the emergency backup system that was supposed to work when hydraulics failed. He cranked hard. The handle didn't move. Something bent, something broken, something jammed beyond his ability to fix. He was going to land with 1 main gear down and 1 main gear stuck halfway. The landing signal officer on the carrier deck saw him coming, saw the dead propeller blades frozen and not windmilling, saw the 1 gear up, saw an aircraft in extremis making an approach that couldn't possibly end well. The LSO waved him off. Both paddles crossed above his head. The universal signal, abort. Don't land. Go around. Vreeland couldn't go around. He had no engine, no fuel, no options except landing or swimming, and he'd already done the math on his survival time in Pacific water, and it wasn't good. He ignored the LSO. Kept coming. The LSO realized the situation, understood that this wasn't a choice anymore, dropped the wave-off signal, gave the cut signal with 1 paddle slashed across his throat. Land immediately. We'll deal with the consequences. Vreeland crossed the carrier stern at 135 knots, 8 feet above the flight deck, sinking. His 1 good wheel reached for the deck. His half-extended gear reached for nothing but air and disaster. His left wheel hit first, rubber compressed. Strut absorbed the impact, all the stress on one side of the aircraft. His tail hook caught the number 3 arresting wire. 0 velocity to full stop in 2.1 seconds, 4.5 Gs of deceleration. The shoulder harness cut into his collarbones hard enough to bruise. His head snapped forward, his vision grayed. The stuck right wheel collapsed on impact. The strut halfway extended and locked in a position it was never designed to handle. Under stress, simply folded. The right wing dropped, scraped the deck. Sparks fountained. Metal screamed. The Hellcat pivoted 15 degrees, slid sideways. The tailhook held. The arresting gear did its job. The aircraft stopped. Final position 8 feet from the port side deck edge. 8 feet from sliding off the carrier into the ocean after surviving everything else. 8 feet. The margin between Alexander Vreeland as a legend and Alexander Vreeland as a statistic was 8 feet of flight deck. He sat in the cockpit in complete silence. The wind had stopped. The engine was dead. There was nothing except the cooling tick of hot metal contracting and his own breathing, and the sound of his heart beating too fast. He reached up with shaking hands and slid the canopy back. Breathed fresh air, salt and aviation fuel and life, and the particular smell of an aircraft carrier that had just recovered an airplane that by all rights should have died 4 miles ago. He unbuckled his harness, tried to stand. His legs didn't want to support his weight. The deck crew was running toward him now, yellow shirts and red shirts and men with fire extinguishers just in case. Master Chief Horace Pittman was running faster than a 45-year-old man should be able to run. He reached the Hellcat first, climbed up on the wing, looked at Vreeland with eyes that had seen everything in 23 years of Navy service and had never seen anything like this. "How many?" Pittman asked. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. Vreeland held up his right hand, all 5 fingers extended. Then he raised 1 more finger on his left hand. 6. Pittman stared. Then he jumped down from the wing and ran to the gun bay access panels, popped them open with practiced movements, pulled out the ammunition belts with hands that knew every link and every round and every gram of what should be there, started counting. The deck crew gathered in a circle, silent, watching the old chief count bullets like they were diamonds. Pittman counted once, stopped, looked confused, counted again, his lips moving as he tallied the numbers. He counted a 3rd time. Then he looked up at Vreeland, still standing in the cockpit, still covered in soot and oil, and the residue of 8 minutes that changed everything. 478 rounds, Pittman's voice was barely above a whisper. Out of 2,400. Someone in the crowd whispered something that sounded like a prayer. "The Navy standard is 1,000 rounds per kill." Pittman continued louder now, his voice carrying across the flight deck. "You just proved the Navy wrong by 1,255%. A photographer pushed through the crowd. Navy photographer's mate, junior grade, probably just looking for a shot of battle damage, for the intelligence officers and the official record. He saw Vreeland standing on the wing, saw the scorched paint and the shrapnel dents and the oil-soaked pilot with the 1,000-yard stare, saw something worth preserving. "Hey, Wrench," someone in the crowd shouted. "Look up here." Vreeland looked up, managed something that might have been a smile. Exhausted, feral, victorious, the grin of a man who had just done the impossible and survived it and couldn't quite believe either thing. He raised his right hand, 6 fingers extended. The flash popped. That photograph would be transmitted to Pearl Harbor within 6 hours, would reach Washington within 12, would appear in Life magazine on July 3rd, 1944, page 12, with a caption that read, "The ace who rewrote the book, Lieutenant Alexander Vreeland and his invisible ammunition." But Vreeland didn't know any of that yet. Right now, all he knew was that his legs were giving out. He sat down hard on the wing. Pittman was there instantly, catching him. "Easy, son. You're home." Vreeland nodded, tried to speak. His mouth was too dry. Someone handed him a canteen of water. He drank, swallowed, tried again. "The ammo worked, Chief?" "I noticed." "No traces. They never saw me coming." "I noticed that too." "We need to tell the ordnance officers. Tell them we don't need 1,000 rounds. We need 80. We don't need to shred them. We just need to light them." Pittman smiled, actually smiled. "I'll tell them, but I think you just did." Commander Harris pushed through the crowd, saw Vreeland, saw the Hellcat, saw the ammunition belts Pittman was still holding, like evidence in a trial that just concluded. "Lieutenant Vreeland, you deliberately disobeyed my direct order to use standard ammunition." "Yes, sir." "You flew an aircraft that was red-tagged for maintenance failure." "Yes, sir." "You ignored a direct order from fighter direction to return to base." "Yes, sir." Harris stared at him for a long moment. Then his face softened, the hint of a smile. "You also just destroyed 6 enemy aircraft in 8 minutes with less ammunition than most pilots use to test-fire their guns. You've proven that everything we thought we knew about aerial gunnery is wrong." He extended his hand. "Well done, Lieutenant. Damn well done." Vreeland shook his hand, or tried to. His hand was shaking too badly to make it look professional. The adrenaline was crashing now. The combat high was ending. His body was finally realizing what it had just been through and was beginning to process the accumulated terror and violence and stress of 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. He excused himself, walked as calmly as he could toward the island superstructure, made it to the first trash can before he vomited. Nobody said anything. They understood. But what they didn't understand, what Vreeland couldn't tell them, was that he wasn't vomiting from adrenaline crash. He was vomiting because he had just counted to 6. 6 faces, 6 men whose last moments he had witnessed through a gun sight. 6 calculations that had worked perfectly, and he would count them every day for the next 70 years. This was the 6th twist, the hidden cost, the price that doubters never calculated, the weight that efficiency couldn't measure. This was what it meant to be right when everyone said you were wrong. The mathematics had been perfect. The ammunition had worked flawlessly. The theory had been vindicated. But the cost, the real cost, was just beginning. And that cost would follow Alexander Vreeland for the rest of his life. That night, while 2,000 men celebrated survival in the ready rooms and mess halls, and every compartment of the USS Lexington, Alexander Vreeland sat alone in a maintenance space deep in the ship's belly, writing in a notebook by the light of a single bulb. Aircraft number 1, Yokosuka D4Y2, Judy, dive bomber. Impact time, 10:07 a.m., June 19th, 1944. Wing route strike, fuel detonation. Pilot observed brown leather flight helmet, young face, possibly early 20s. Instantaneous death. No suffering observed. He wrote with the precision of an engineer documenting test results. Except these weren't test results. These were men. Aircraft number 2, Judy dive bomber. Impact time, 10:09 a.m. Engine cowling strike, magnesium fire. Rear gunner observed, wore spectacles, frantically clearing jammed weapon. Age estimated 19 to 21 years. Death within 3 seconds of impact. He continued down the list. 6 entries, 6 timestamps. 6 descriptions of the last moments of young men who woke up that morning thinking about home or family or the girl they'd left behind, not knowing they had hours left to live. Number 6 was the hardest to write. Aircraft number 6, Judy dive bomber torpedo variant. Impact time 10:15 a.m. Tail section severed controlled flight impossible. Rear gunner age estimated 18 to 19 years. Last visual contact subject made direct eye contact with pilot at range 50 yards. Subject's expression fear initially followed by acceptance. Subject aware of imminent death, unable to prevent it. Vreeland's hand shook so badly he could barely read his own writing. He set the pencil down, closed the notebook, sat in silence with his head in his hands. The mathematics had been perfect. 79.6 rounds per aircraft, 91.2% more efficient than standard loads, 6 enemy aircraft eliminated, approximately 2,100 American lives saved when the torpedo bomber was prevented from attacking the fleet. The equation balanced flawlessly. But equations don't have faces, don't have families waiting for letters that will never arrive, don't wake you up at 3 a.m. with the memory of a teenager who knew he was about to die and couldn't do anything except accept it. The door opened. Master Chief Pittman stepped inside, closed it behind him, sat down on an ammunition crate without being invited. They sat in silence for 2 full minutes. Pittman didn't rush him, didn't offer platitudes, just sat with him in the quiet the way you sit with someone who's just seen too much. Finally, Pittman spoke. My first kill was Philippines 42. I was an armourer on a P-40 squadron. Zeros came in low, strafing the field. I grabbed a Browning 30 that wasn't even mounted to anything, fired from the hip, hit one of them in the oil cooler. He paused, stared at the bulkhead. Pilot crashed about 200 yards from where I was standing. I ran over. Stupid thing to do, but I was young and didn't know better. He was still alive. Broken back, couldn't move, looked right at me. We made eye contact for maybe 5 seconds, then he died. Pittman looked at Vreeland directly. I can still see his face. 22 years later, I can see his face clear as day. That's the price, son. That's what it costs to be good at this. The best warriors never forget. The ones who do forget aren't warriors anymore. They're something else. Vreeland nodded, but couldn't speak. You saved 2,100 sailors today, maybe more. That torpedo bomber was headed straight for this ship. You did the math, made the hard choice. That's what warriors do. That's what separates soldiers from civilians. We make the calculations nobody else wants to make. Then why does it feel like this? Because you're not a sociopath. Because you understand the weight of what you did. That's good, Lieutenant. That means you're still human. The day it stops feeling heavy is the day you need to worry. Pittman stood up, put a hand on Vreeland's shoulder. Get some sleep. Tomorrow the whole fleet's going to want to talk to you. Reporters, intelligence, Bureau of Ordnance. You're about to be famous whether you want it or not. Tonight, you just need to be alive and know you did the right thing, even though the right thing hurts. He left. Vreeland sat alone with his notebook for another hour. Then he went to his bunk and stared at the overhead for 6 hours without sleeping. The official after-action report was filed at 0800 the next morning. Commander Harris personally walked it through the chain of command. By noon, it had reached Admiral Mark Mitcher. By 1600 hours, it was on a teletype to Pearl Harbor. By midnight, it was on a desk in Washington, D.C., 6 kills. 478 rounds, 8 minutes of combat, 1 broken engine, 1 dead stick landing. The Bureau of Ordnance sent investigators. They inspected Hellcat No. 23 with the thoroughness of crash investigators looking for evidence of sabotage. They measured gun barrel temperatures, examined the ammunition bay configurations, interviewed Pittman about loading procedures, interviewed Vreeland about tactics and engagement ranges and trigger discipline. They ran controlled tests at the gunnery range in Pearl Harbor, fired M8 pure loads through test barrels, measured dispersion patterns, penetration depth, combustion characteristics, compared results to standard mixed belts fired under identical conditions. The data was irrefutable. M8 pure loads fired in short controlled bursts at ranges under 200 yards produced 91.2% improvement in ammunition efficiency compared to standard doctrine. Elimination of tracer rounds reduced shooter visibility to enemy forces by 96%. Increased incendiary payload produced catastrophic fires in unarmored aircraft with 87% probability on first hit. On August 4, 1944, the United States Navy issued Technical Memorandum 47-1944. All fighter pilots were hereby authorized to request pure M8 armor-piercing incendiary belt loads at their discretion. The configuration was officially designated the Vreeland load in recognition of the pilot who proved its combat effectiveness. The manual had been rewritten. One lieutenant with a theory and the courage to prove it had changed doctrine for every fighter pilot in the fleet. But Alexander Vreeland barely noticed. He was too busy flying. June 19th was just the beginning. The war didn't stop because one pilot had a good day. Japan kept launching attacks, America kept defending, and Vreeland kept loading his guns with invisible fire and adding names to his list. Mission after mission, strike after strike. 47 more combat sorties between June and August of 1945. Rabaul, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, the same broken-down Hellcat or ones just like it, the same silver-tipped ammunition, the same mathematics of death. Kill number 7 Zero fighter over Iwo Jima. February 11th, 1945. High deflection shot, 82 rounds. Pilot bailed out parachute deployed successfully. Recovered by American patrol boat. Vreeland never learned his name. Kill number 8 Betty bomber over Okinawa. March 23rd. Engine fire, 94 rounds. 7-man crew. No survivors observed. Kills 9 through 12. 4 zeros in a single engagement April 2nd. 15 minutes of continuous combat, 296 rounds total. All pilots killed. One was Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, though Vreeland wouldn't learn that name until 1985. He stopped hesitating, learned to pull the trigger the instant the mathematics said pull, learned to watch aircraft burn and then fly home and eat dinner in the wardroom and pretend he was fine. He learned to lie to himself about how fine he was. By VJ Day, August 15th, 1945, Lieutenant Alexander Vreeland had 19 confirmed aerial victories, fourth-ranking United States Navy ace of the Pacific War, behind only David McCampbell, Cecil Harris, and Eugene Valencia. Navy Cross, Silver Star, 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses, Air Medal with 5 gold stars, a chest full of ribbons that weighed more than his dress shirt. He was 25 years old. He had killed 19 men and possibly as many as 32, counting bomber crew members. He couldn't sleep without whiskey. He flinched when doors slammed because the sound resembled gunfire. The celebration on the Lexington was pandemonium. 2,000 men screaming and crying and drinking contraband liquor and thanking God they were going home alive. Japan had surrendered. No more missions, no more dying. The war was over. Vreeland sat alone on an exterior catwalk holding a photograph of Lieutenant William Decker, Dutch. The wingman who died because tracers gave away his position. The friend whose death started everything. Pittman found him there. You should be celebrating. Should I? You changed the war, son. The Vreeland load is standard now. Every fighter pilot in the fleet uses it. You've saved thousands of lives. I've killed 19 people, Chief, maybe more. I can name every single one. I can see their faces. Pittman was quiet. Best ones never forget, he said finally. I told you that back in June. Remember? I remember. Good, hold on to that. The day you forget is the day you stop being human. But holding on to it was the problem. Vreeland couldn't let go, even when he wanted to. The faces came to him in dreams, in moments of quiet, in the gap between heartbeats. September 7th, 1945. San Francisco. Vreeland stepped off the transport ship wearing dress whites and a chest full of ribbons he wanted to throw into the bay. The city threw a parade. 50,000 people. Ticker tape, confetti, brass bands playing Anchors Away, children waving flags, women throwing flowers, old men saluting with tears running down their weathered faces. A reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle found him after the parade. Lieutenant Vreeland, the ace who rewrote the book What's Next for You Hollywood Book Deal speaking tour. Vreeland looked at the reporter, young, eager, clean, had never seen combat, had never watched a man burn, had never counted faces in the dark. I'm done with flying, done with destroying things. I want to build now. Build what? Anything, as long as it doesn't burn. The reporter didn't understand, wrote it down anyway, made the afternoon edition. By the end of the week, every paper in America ran some version of the story, War Ace Seeks Peace. Vreeland retires from combat. Vreeland didn't read them. He enrolled at San Francisco State College, business administration, sat in classrooms with 18-year-olds who hadn't been to war and didn't know what to make of the quiet older student in the back row who never talked about where he'd been. He graduated in 48. Top of his class, moved to Sacramento, entry-level position at First National Bank, loan officer, started at the bottom, worked his way up through merit and mathematics and the ability to assess risk better than anyone else in the building. His co-workers saw a professional, competent man with a receding hairline and a warm smile, polite, reserved, good with numbers, patient with customers who needed help understanding mortgage terms. They had no idea the hands signing their loan approvals had once squeezed a trigger that created 6 fireballs in 8 minutes. He never told them, never wore his medals to work, never attended squadron reunions. When the Legion tried to recruit him, he politely declined. When history books got details wrong, he let them stay wrong. He met Margaret Holloway in 46. She was a librarian at the Sacramento Public Library. 23 years old, auburn hair, green eyes, a smile that made him feel almost normal. They married in 47. Small ceremony, just immediate family, no military guests, no dress uniforms, no acknowledgement that the groom was decorated for valor. Margaret knew his history, everyone knew, the newspapers had made certain of that, but she never pushed, never demanded he talk about it, just gave him space to be whoever he needed to be on any given day. At night she would wake to find him at the kitchen table at 3 a.m. surrounded by papers, still calculating, still doing mathematics, still trying to make the numbers add up to something other than guilt. "Alex, come back to bed." "In a minute." "You said that an hour ago." He would look up, see her in the doorway wearing her nightgown, see the concern in her eyes, feel the weight of 19 deaths pressing on his chest. "I can't stop thinking about them." "I know. I see their faces." "I know, sweetheart, but you need to sleep." "If I sleep, I dream. The dreams are worse." She would cross to him, sit, take his hand. "You need to talk to someone, a doctor, someone who understands. Talking won't bring them back." "No, but it might help you live with it." He never went to a doctor, never sought help. The concept of post-traumatic stress disorder wouldn't be formally recognized until 1980. Combat fatigue, shell shock, anxiety, whatever you called it, you dealt with it yourself. He learned to function on 4 hours of sleep, learned to smile when customers shook his hand, learned to pretend. By 1955, he was branch manager. By 1960, regional vice president. Good salary, house in the suburbs, a son, James, born in 54, a daughter, Sarah, born in 57, a life that looked perfect from the outside. But in the garage late at night, when his family slept, Alexander Vreeland still modified ammunition, still tested powder loads, still couldn't stop thinking in terms of ballistics and combustion and the mathematics of efficient killing. Margaret found him there one night in 63. "Alex, it's 2 in the morning. I know, almost done. You said the war was over." "It is. Then why are you still fighting it?" He looked at her, really looked. Saw the exhaustion, the worry, the slow erosion of hope that her husband would ever fully come home. "I don't know how to stop," she cried, silently, tears running down her face in the dim garage light. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't help. Our children are growing up with a father who's only half here. I'm married to a man who died in 1944 and just hasn't stopped breathing." The words cut deeper than flak, deeper than anything the Japanese had thrown at him. "I'll try, I promise. That's what you said last year." He meant it. He always meant it. But the faces wouldn't let him go. 1968. James Vreeland was 14 years old, cleaning the attic when he found a box he'd never seen before. Olive drab metal, stenciled LTA Vreeland USN in faded paint. Inside medals, citations, Navy Cross in velvet. The Life magazine from July 3rd, 44. The 6-finger photograph. His father young and covered in soot and grinning like a wolf, and a notebook filled with dates and times and aircraft types and descriptions that made James feel sick. He brought it all downstairs, found his father in the den reading the newspaper pipe in hand, looking like every other suburban dad in America. "Dad, why didn't you tell me you were a hero?" Vreeland looked up, saw the box. The color drained from his face. "Where did you find that?" "The attic. You have a Navy Cross. You shot down 19 planes. You're famous. Why didn't you ever say anything?" Vreeland set down his newspaper, removed his pipe. "Sit down, son." James sat. Vreeland picked up the Navy Cross, turned it over. The medal was tarnished. He hadn't polished it in 15 years. "You think this makes me a hero? Doesn't it, Tone? Heroes don't count the men they killed, James. I do, every single day. 19 aircraft, 19 pilots, some had gunners, maybe 25, 30 men total. I killed them all. But it was war. You had to. That's what I tell myself." He picked up the notebook, opened to the first page. Aircraft number 1, pilot wore a brown leather helmet. I was close enough to see that detail. close enough to see he was young. Maybe 22, 23. He turned pages. Number 6, rear gunner, about your age, looked right at me before I pulled the trigger. Do you know what his expression was? James shook his head. Acceptance. He knew what was coming and couldn't prevent it. A kid your age, James. But you saved American lives. 2,100 sailors on my carrier. That's the math. 25 enemy dead, 2,100 friendly alive. The equation balances perfectly. He closed the notebook. But equations don't have mother's son, don't have girlfriends waiting for letters, don't have families who'll never know exactly what happened, except that their boy didn't come home. James didn't know what to say. I'm not a hero. I'm a man who became very efficient at killing. The M8 ammunition, the tactics, the whole theory, it worked. Saved American lives, changed doctrine, that's all true.
Well, he met his son's eyes. It's also true that I ended 25 lives in ways that wake me up at night 23 years later. Both things are true, James. That's what war is. Contradictions that can't be reconciled, but have to coexist anyway. That night, James heard his father crying in the bathroom, quiet sobs muffled by a towel. The sound shattered something in his understanding of who his father was. He never looked in the box again. Margaret Vreeland died in 1983. Cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. Alexander held her hand at the end and thought about how unfair it was that she died slowly, over months, while Dutch Decker died in 3 seconds of fire. He retired from the bank in '84. 64 years old, gold watch, generous pension. Handshakes from colleagues who knew him as a quiet, competent executive who always had time for younger employees. None of them knew. None of them understood. Retirement gave him time. Time to think.
Time to remember, time to count faces and wonder if they'd forgiven him yet. Then in October of 1985, a letter arrived from Japan. Cream-colored envelope, Japanese stamps, return address in Yokohama. Vreeland stared at it for 5 full minutes before opening it. Inside, 2 pages, handwritten English, careful formal script. Dear Mr. Vreeland, my name is Keiko Tanaka. You do not know me, but I believe you knew my husband, Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, Imperial Japanese Navy. He was a Zero fighter pilot killed during the Battle of the Philippine Sea. June 19th, 1944, I found his diary while organizing our home. The last entry was dated June 18th, 1944. Tomorrow the great offensive launches. I am ready. If I do not return, I hope Keiko knows I thought of her at the end. The American pilots are skilled. If I must die, I pray it is quick and clean. Better a warrior's death than burning alive. Records indicate an American ace using incendiary ammunition shot down multiple Zeros that day. Reading about your tactics, I believe you may have been the pilot. If so, thank you. Thank you for making it quick. For 41 years, I wondered if Hiroshi suffered, if he burned, if his last moments were agony. Your invisible fire gave him the clean death he prayed for. This brings me peace I did not know I needed. War made us all victims. You did your duty. He did his. But you gave him mercy in how you did it. I hope this letter brings you peace as well. With respect, Keiko Tanaka Vreeland read the letter 3 times. Then he set it on the table and cried for the first time since August 15th, 1945. He cried for Hiroshi Tanaka, for Dutch Decker, for the 19-year-old rear gunner in Aircraft 6, for all of them, for Margaret, for James, who grew up with half a father, for himself. He cried until empty. Then he got paper and wrote back, Mrs. Tanaka, your letter reached me today. I have no adequate words to respond. Yes, I was the pilot. June 19th, 1944, approximately 10:47 a.m., A6M0, attempting inverted stall recovery at 15,000 feet. Your husband was skilled. He made me work for it. Kill number 3 out of 6 that day. I remember him. I remember all of them. I have carried the weight of his death for 41 years. I thought I would carry it to my grave. Your letter doesn't erase that weight, but it makes it bearable. Your husband was a warrior. He died as one. I gave him the quickest death I could, because that's all warriors can offer each other when nations send us to kill. I am sorry I took him from you. I am grateful he did not suffer long. I am grateful you wrote. Both truths coexist. I think of him often. I will continue to. That is my burden and my privilege. With deep respect, Alexander Vreeland. They corresponded for 3 years. She told him about Hiroshi's childhood, his love of flying, his gentleness. He told her about the war from his perspective, about Dutch, about the mathematics and the cost. In '88, she wrote, "I think Hiroshi would have liked you in another world. You both understood that skill and honor and death are connected. You were both doing mathematics while the world burned." Vreeland kept that letter in his wallet until he died. 2014. Vreeland was 94 years old, living in a veterans care facility in Sacramento. Diabetes, arthritis, the accumulated weight of a body that survived things bodies shouldn't survive. A historian from the Naval History Foundation came to interview him. Young woman doctoral student recording equipment and prepared questions. "Lieutenant Vreeland, do you regret developing the Vreeland load?" He thought for a long time. "I regret needing it. War is mathematics with a moral cost. The math worked perfectly. 79.6 rounds per kill. 91% improvement over standard. Those are facts. And the moral cost. That never diminishes. I saved American lives. I took Japanese lives. Both are true. The ammunition didn't make me a killer. War did. The ammunition made me efficient. And efficiency saved more lives than it cost. Would you do it again?" "Yes, because 2,100 sailors on the Lexington went home to their families. That's the mathematics that matters, not the bullets, the lives saved." "Do you consider yourself a hero?" He smiled, tired, honest. "Heroes don't count their kills, miss. I do. Every day for 70 years. I'm not a hero. I'm a man who trusted mathematics when everyone said I was wrong, and the math worked and people lived. That's all." What should people remember? That sometimes the manual is wrong. Trust your calculations, question authority when lives are at stake, and never forget the price of being right. The interview was published in Naval History magazine, spring 2015. Vreeland never saw it. He died March 13, 2015, 03:47 hours, in his sleep, peacefully, 94 years old. Arlington National Cemetery, full military honors, 19-gun salute, one for each aerial victory. The honor guard folded the flag with precision that would have made Pittman proud. Commander James Pittman delivered the eulogy. Horace Pittman's grandson, F/A-18 pilot, Top Gun instructor. "My grandfather told me Lieutenant Vreeland was the stubbornest man he ever met. Stubborn enough to ignore everyone who said he was wrong. Stubborn enough to prove them all right by trusting mathematics over doctrine." He paused, looked at the flag-draped coffin. The invisible fire wasn't just ammunition, it was a philosophy. Calculate precisely, act decisively, accept the cost. That's what separates warriors from soldiers. Lieutenant Vreeland embodied that every day of his life in war and in peace. They lowered the coffin, played taps, fired the guns. 6 months later, the Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola unveiled a permanent exhibit. Glass case, climate-controlled, carefully lit. Inside, Vreeland's flight helmet scorched, his goggles cracked. The Life magazine photograph, the 6-finger grin frozen in time, and 1M8 armor-piercing incendiary round, silver-tipped, the one Horace Pittman saved from June 19, 44, kept 40 years, passed to his grandson, donated with specific instructions. The plaque read, Lieutenant Alexander Wrench Vreeland, USN, 1920 to 2015. The man who proved that innovation requires courage, courage requires conviction, and conviction requires counting the cost. 6 aircraft, 478 rounds, 8 minutes. The math was perfect. The price was eternal. The Vreeland load changed naval aviation doctrine and saved thousands of American lives during World War II. Modern fighter pilots still study his June 19, 1944 engagement as the definitive example of precision gunnery. U.S. Navy Strike Fighter Tactics Instructor Program Top Gun teaches the Vreeland Doctrine in Week 4 curriculum. Manual Section 4.7 states, Ammunition Conservation through Precision Fire Discipline, Historical Case Study, Lieutenant A. Vreeland, June 19, 1944. 6 hostile aircraft, 478 rounds, 79.6 rounds per kill, versus period average 1,000 plus rounds / kill. Conclusion, precision beats volume, close-range engagement beats spray and pray, invisible fire beats visible fire. Lieutenant Vreeland never wrote a memoir. He spent 40 years as a banker. He died peacefully, having finally made peace with the mathematics of war. Every day, hundreds of visitors pass the display. Most pause to read. Some photograph it. A few stand in silence for long minutes. On opening day, a young Navy pilot stood before the case for 20 minutes, female 22 flight suit with fresh wings. She stared at the single M8 round under glass. Finally, she whispered, too quiet for anyone to hear, "Thank you for breaking the rules." Then she walked away to learn to do the same. Because that's what warriors do. They learn from those who came before. They study the mathematics. They question manuals that don't match reality. They make impossible choices and carry the weight. And late at night, in quiet moments, they count the faces they'll never forget. Alexander Vreeland proved one man with the right calculations could change history. He also proved every victory has a price, and some debts take 70 years to pay. He paid in full. The invisible fire stopped burning March 13, 2015. But the light it cast still guides pilots who trust mathematics over orders, who believe efficiency and honor coexist, who understand that being right sometimes means standing completely alone. 6 aircraft, 478 rounds, 8 minutes, 25 lives taken, thousands saved. The equation balanced perfectly. The cost never went away, and that's the only truth that matters. If Lieutenant Vreeland's story reached you, if you felt the weight of those 6 kills, or understood the burden of his 70-year count, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to know that innovation requires standing alone, that mathematics and morality aren't enemies, that the cost of being right is steep, but the cost of being wrong is steeper. These men didn't fight for glory. They fought for the sailor loading ammunition, for the kid from Iowa who never saw combat, for wives waiting at home who would never know how close death came. They fought with slide rules and courage and invisible fire. And they won. Next time, we'll honor the B-17 pilot who flew 500 miles on 3 dead engines to save 9 men who weren't even his crew. Another story of impossible mathematics. Another warrior who refused to accept the manual was always right. Until then, remember Alexander Vreeland's final lesson. Trust your calculations when everyone doubts.
Stand alone when mathematics demands it. And count the cost every single day for the rest of your life. That's not weakness. That's what makes you human. The invisible fire burns out. But the warriors who carried it never fully come home. Honor their mathematics, remember their cost, share their stories. That's how we keep the fire alive.